Okay, welcome to the book club for what is today, July 27th, 2017. My name is Dana Morningstar, and this is the book club book for the Respect Me Rules by Michael and Shelley Marshall. And we've got a whole group tonight, so this is so exciting. Let me head over there and see. Are you guys here?
Hi.
Hi, Dana.
Hi.
Okay, everybody's here.
Hello.
So we have with us tonight, we have Lucy, Shay, Marcia, and Z. And yeah, so this is going to be our first time doing the book club in a group like this. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll go from there. So, okay, let's just hop right into it. So the Respect Me rules. Lucy, this was a book club book choice by one of the many fantastic choices by you, I might add, but it was a book choice book by you. And Lucy has her notes on the forum if anybody's interested in reading them. And I'll be posting my notes from the book in the next few days. So if you want to go to my website, thriveafterabuse.com, and then go to the support group section, you can see the notes under the book club there. So Lucy has some fantastic notes and some really great thought-provoking questions about this book. So I guess to start, Lucy, when you first, I guess, what was the appeal of this book initially, and why did you feel it would make a good book club book?
Well, when I first read it, it was the title appealed to me first because Respect Me was exactly the lack that I was feeling in my relationships with all the people in my life. I really felt that there was a lack of respect. And so just that title just grabbed me right away. So that's what appealed. But what I also liked about it once I actually got into it and read it is the simplicity, really. I'd been working on this for a very long time, struggling with it, trying all kinds of complicated phrasing and smart alecky remarks and just trying to do quick comebacks, and just not my strong point.
And when you say it, when you were working on it, what do you mean in specific?
I was working on myself, trying to make the changes that I felt would improve the relationship, and where there might be that respect that I was feeling lacking, that I could have some impact on that. And what the book taught me was how to look at this more simply in just a boundary setting way, and what to say and how to say it. That's the key. Like I said, I was looking at things very in a complex way, and the book just broke it down so simply for me. So I really like that.
Yeah, I agree. We were talking a little bit before the live stream started about boundaries and kind of some of the struggles that those of us in the book club group have had with this. And, for me, like Lucy was saying, she was really struggling with this and making, kind of twisting herself into this emotional pretzel, thinking, how do I approach this? And it's got to be this kind of complex, overwhelming thing to do, to set these boundaries. And I think I was almost the opposite of that. I would let stuff slide. And I don't think I gave it that much thought until it was almost too late, until I would get pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and then I would explode. And then I would get mad. I think more so at the other person.
Right.
it took a long time for me to realize that I needed to stop things kind of more upstream until they got to that point. And so that was a really, and this is still something that I'm definitely working on. Actually, the timing of this book is just spot on with a lot of different things I've got going on in my own life. And but you know, it really is, it's like we start learning how to really set boundaries and realizing that, you know, waiting until things get so bad that we explode on somebody, that, you know, that's not setting a boundary. And then the book covers really well, actually, like how to go about setting a boundary, and which I really, really liked. And I thought that was helpful. And I think a lot of people that are in, you know, abusive, narcissistically abusive type relationships, we were talking about this too before the stream started, is, you know, they're so afraid to set a boundary because, or even speak up, because they're afraid that they're going to lose this other person. And it's sort of like
Yes.
at any given time, it's this feeling that, oh my goodness, this friendship or this relationship or this job is one conversation away from being over.
Can I add something there?
Please, yes.
Okay. It's something that really crystallized more for me when I was reading this book is that when you have a quote codependent, not that I like that word, but just to use that word, and a narcissist, whatever that is, together, you've got two people who both agree that it's all about the narcissist. And that's what we don't know we're agreeing to. I mean, we don't do that willingly from a conscious standpoint. It's just there. And when you start realizing, wait a second, this isn't how things ought to be, the whole respect me thing is turning it around so that you're putting the focus back on yourself. And that can be very hard and overwhelming when you've never really done that. Do you know
Completely.
what I'm, that was just to see it in that exact frame was very eye-opening to me. And it's all kind of about respect me, myself. It doesn't matter if someone else respects me. That's totally out of the box. It's just got to be me respecting me. And that's what's hard when your focus is always out there on someone else's feelings and making someone else comfortable, and you're not in it. Having to shift that around so that now you're tuned into you, that's a tough thing for, I think, most of us, at least in the beginning.
Can I add something as well? When you've been abused, going all the way back from childhood, and for me, I didn't know what boundaries were, and it was normal for people to treat me a certain way. So when people was disrespecting me and doing things, I just thought it was normal, and I just wanted to be nice. And like Dana said, I wanted people to like me. I don't want to ruffle the feathers. And so as I started over my lifetime, it was just draining me. And at home, I'm like, oh, they're not treating me right. I felt it, but at the time, I didn't know it. And then over the years, I figured out, oh, people are treating me this way because, you know, they see me as a doormat. And that was a hard pill to swallow. Because I used to say, what do they see across my face? They see I'm stupid? Because I know I wasn't. But then now to know, then I have to go back and teach people how to treat me. Then that's the hard part, because you were never taught. So just looking at these notes, Lucy, it does look like the author did very specific on how to set boundaries.
Yes. And, you know, the whole thing with setting boundaries and examining what has been our pattern for allowing people to mistreat us. And, you know, for so many people, it starts at a pretty young age. And to realize, you know, we do have a voice, and we have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Like, those are basic human rights. Prisoners are given those rights.
Right.
It's like, I'm actually a real person. I'm a person.
Right. I matter. And you know, like, it's okay. You know, I'm nice to people. I expect them to be nice to me. And this book is all about really drawing that line and just demanding that respect. And one thing too that I really liked about this book that I feel was a big missing piece in a lot of other books is it very clearly says, you know, when you start being assertive with an abusive person, the abuse will escalate.
Yes.
They're not going to like it, and you need to really prepare yourself emotionally and physically for this. And if you are in, and with this book, with really frankly any strategy with being assertive to an abusive person, they say, you know, if you're going to start standing up for yourself, realize that physical abuse is an absolute game changer, and it can really, things can escalate quickly and it can put somebody in harm's way. So they're a huge advocate, and I agree completely. If there's physical abuse present, that really, the best strategy, the safest strategy is leaving the situation.
And I think also if you even think if they've ever threatened you with any type of abuse, like there was an example of drawing a picture of where someone, I guess their husband or their boyfriend drew a picture of what they would do to them someday, you know, and so even if you think there might be an abuse, might be abuse, you want to definitely take that into consideration before setting boundaries. And another thought I had too about respect, I don't think women are as encouraged to respect themselves, and so they have a little bit more difficulty with that concept of setting boundaries because they're afraid they're going to come across as not kind or feminine, and they're afraid that's going to be like maybe bitchy or witchy to say, if you do this to me, this is what will happen. So I think there's a tendency for women not to, they're always thinking about the other person, and you know, and not wanting to rock the boat and set like definite boundaries like that. And for me it was out of fear of the person getting upset and leaving, and that's why I wouldn't have done that in the beginning myself.
Well,
Yes.
somewhere along the lines, we learned, at least contextually, that love goes away if people don't think you're being nice to them. I mean, when you think about it, even if you don't have that as an actual statement in your belief system, subconsciously it's under there. And I really had to work at getting that out of there.
I agree, Shay. I'm still working on that.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, there was there was so much in this book. Like there was so much that I just thought was so great. And wow, let me see. I have my notes on this too. Some of my hold on a second here. One of the things that they said was an abuser cannot abuse someone who will not accept being lied to, berated, put down, discounted, threatened, called names, yelled at, or raged. Without a target, the abuse can't land anywhere. If you refuse to dance, the dance must end. Or if there can't be a fight if you don't get in the ring. We can't control an abuser, and dragging them into therapy to get them to change will not work. We can only change us, and when we do, they will either be forced to change how they react to us, either in a good way, or if the abuse gets worse, then somebody needs to leave. And they had said something else. Oh, here it is. That a good person, because so often we justify it saying, oh, well, they're a friend or a family member, or, you know, I love them, that kind of thing. And they really spell out, they said, you know, a good person does not treat their spouse with disdain, hostility, or criticism. And not just their spouse, but anybody, right? Like a friend, a family member, like, you know, people that are not abusive. Like abusive people treat each other with disdain, hostility, or criticism. And that's not the way that a relationship can't work if you're being treated like that. And they go on to say a good husband or wife treats their spouse better than their best buddies.
Mhm.
And they will not hide behind scripture, culture, gender, or tradition to justify mistreatment of anyone, especially their spouse. And then I wanted to add that it's important to realize that this needs to be a two-way street. So, because this is the other thing too, when I was reading this book, I kept thinking, oh man, if an abusive person read this book, I could see how they could just really twist this and use a lot of this stuff against their
Well,
target.
that's what they do with everything.
That's
Of
what they
course
do with
would.
everything. Right, valid point.
Right.
But I really felt like with this, they really, really could. And so I think it's important to realize, so even though the book is saying that a good husband or wife treats their spouse better than their best buddy, it's important to realize that that needs to be a two-way street. So if an abusive person's like, you need to respect me, you're not being good to me. This book, Dana says, right, that you need to treat me better than you do your best friend. But if it's not a two-way street, then there's something off when you're being targeted. So I think just to clarify, because abusive behavior, it's manipulative behavior. And when something's manipulated, it's skewed, it's changed in oftentimes subtle ways from like what it is or what it should be to something that it's not. Kind of like taking an image in Photoshop where it was one thing, but then you manipulate it into changing it into a different image. So I think it's just important to kind of realize
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times that it's been twisted around that what they're doing to me is somehow twisted around and I'm doing it to them.
Well, that's the projection.
And my mouth falls open and I can't talk because I didn't do it. You did it, but somehow now I've done it to you.
Yes.
And it's always jaw-dropping.
Like Dana said, you hold it inside and you hold it inside, then finally you blow and maybe get really mad or say something, and then they go, see, you're the one with the abuse problem.
Exactly.
You're the one being rude or disrespectful. So
and another thing they do that I haven't seen talked about a whole lot is the pretended stupidity or pretending they don't understand.
Yes.
But also pretending that they're really struggling to understand. So then you feel like you're a crappy communicator and your idea sucks and you're wrong. And one thing I've realized is that if that starts, like the second that starts, I'm done trying to explain because I'm not playing that game anymore. But it took me forever to learn that. Because if you have to get into that where you're speaking English and you're explaining something 5 different ways and they're staring at you like you're ridiculous,
yes,
you're not going to ever get anywhere. It doesn't matter how eloquent you are. It's not going to happen.
I kept trying to research what I was doing wrong because I felt it was me. I was communicating wrong. I was hurting his feelings. I was not being considerate of his. I kept researching on the internet. What am I doing wrong? What's wrong with me? And I didn't realize this was just a game that he was playing. I didn't realize I wasn't respecting me. I just thought I was somehow doing something. I was the one that had the problem.
Yep.
That's a huge part of it too, is it takes a while for us to see that it's a game and that they're not sincere in their communication, that it's all of these little micro aggressions and micro power and control dynamics at play, where it's spun back around and it's made to seem like, oh, I'm sorry, I just don't understand you. I think a lot of the women can relate to this. If you've encountered a very misogynistic abuser where it's like, well, you know what, you're just too emotional, you're just crazy. It's very discounting, it's very demeaning. I'm a man, I use logic and reason. You're the problem, you're just too emotional to communicate. And I'm sure men encounter some sort of like the opposite of that, maybe like, oh, well, you just don't understand, or I'm sure that they encounter. It would be interesting to have a guy on this panel. Hopefully we can have that, because I'd be curious to hear from their point of view, what they experience. But one of the things in the book that they said about that is when an abusive person does start playing stupid, is to repeat what you said. And I like, this is a great technique with a child or a teenager too, is to be very, very firm, where, if you say, and you just repeat yourself, you don't reword it, you don't elaborate, you don't try to make yourself heard, you don't try to improve your communication, because the communication's not the issue, it's the manipulation that's the issue. So to be very assertive and say, I am not going to be talked to like that, or and to not let them bait you into an argument of, oh, I didn't know, or what was I doing wrong, and all these little games that they play, to stick to your guns about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Tahiti in the chat is saying, he says, yes, so far this sounds like my experience with abusive women too. I'm sure. I mean, it's the same behavior. It just comes out in different ways.
Right.
And abusive people will use whatever they have in order to gain power and control over others. So, I mean, it's kind of whatever they have. So for a person that's tall, they might use intimidation and getting louder and kind of hovering over somebody. Whereas if a person's short, they might get really loud, they might become really aggressive, they might say things like, nobody's going to believe you, or I'm not the problem, look at me, I'm only 5 feet tall. So anything, they're always going to be figuring out kind of what angle they can play to get power and control over the situation, regardless of gender or anything else. It just, the gender part is where it can come out a little differently.
Yeah, that's the answer to every question of why do they do that? It's always power and control.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
And finding what your weak point is, they study that and what triggers you, and then that they go directly for that, because then they know you can get paralyzed or freeze and think you're crazy, when they're doing that. So
yeah. And
yeah.
Jamie in the chat made a great comment. Oh my gosh, I think it's one that so many people can relate to, where with these kind of crazy making conversations where you think, oh, it's our relationship issue is a communication issue.
Right.
And if I can just somehow get through to them, if I can just improve my own communication, and I would bet too that a lot of people, because we were talking before the live stream started, how so many of us, it's just so weird. We've all read so many of the same books, right? And how probably so many of us start off with these self-help books thinking like, well, if I can just improve myself, then I can somehow improve this relationship and I can make things work because I'm the issue. And with communication, so Jamie was saying, yeah, that she felt that they were on the brink of a breakthrough for 17 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right? I mean, ouch and wow, because that's the cycle of abuse, where you think you're getting through and then boom, now you're back to square one, and then things escalate again. And then, it's all of these false promises of change, and then boom, you're back to square one. And every single time you think this time is going to be different. It's got to be different. This time they seem more sincere. They're finally, after 16 years, they're promising to go to therapy, but no matter what, things just don't change. Speaking of therapy, one of the things that they touched on in the book, which I really liked, is they said, abusive behavior is never okay. And a therapy session, the therapist obviously should not be used as kind of this agent for like abuse by proxy. And so many abusive people will get their partner into therapy and it becomes this abuse session where the therapist is treating it like, well, it's a communication issue. Both sides need to be heard. If you change your behavior, they'll change their behavior, kind of a thing. And they said, you're absolutely with the wrong therapist if they're allowing you to be abused in any way during a therapy session. And abuse too, because it can be so subtle, it's really that demeaning diminishing behavior in a nutshell. So it's those subtle put downs, it's those jabs, and that stuff it's not okay. It's never okay, but especially not in a therapy session because I think it was Marsha that was saying, you know, they're gonna, or maybe it was Z, that what they find out about you, they're gonna use against you later. And so that's kind of the other downside of therapy is if you're being so open about you know, here we are trying to be like, let's work towards a solution, and really they're gathering intel, and you know, you're telling them here's everything that you've done, and then the next fight you have, all of that comes out and it's used against you.
Right. Whenever you can't say I feel to a narcissist, because if you do, you're giving them a map. Before they were kind of shooting with a shotgun and hoping to hit their target. But once you say, when you do this, I feel sad or hurt. Now you've given them a roadmap of exactly how to do it. I've seen it over and over again. Once you really open up and share your deepest, quickest way to hurt you, they've got it now. They know exactly how to do it, and they will keep pushing that button.
And they do in the early part of the relationship, you might tell them things about your feelings because you don't know you're dealing with a narcissist. Like I told mine about how much I hated the silent treatment. So that's what he used. After that, I didn't I didn't realize he was going to use that as ammo against me, because you think you're talking to a friend, someone who cares about you. And so you share your feelings and what bothers you, what you like, and then they just use that to hurt you down the road.
Yes, I agree. And speaking of the silent treatment, so one of the last problematic people that I had in my life, I had met this guy online, and you know, we were Skyping and really hitting it off, and he up into the silent treatment. I don't even remember what happened. It was like I think I like disagreed with him, and then I got the silent treatment for a couple days, and it was so disproportionate to what had happened. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that was either the first or the second incident where I just was so knocked off balance because that had not been before. We were getting along famously. And so I was just really caught off guard by that. And I had told him, I said, you know, if you could please text me and just let me know that you're not dead in a ditch. And because I don't know what happened. And then, you know, finally he did, and then kind of went silent treatment again. And I told him, I said, I don't do silent treatment. So we can either, if you need time to cool off because you're upset about whatever, you need to let me know and then we can talk again, but I'm not doing silent treatment. And then he quit doing that, but then he switched tactics. And that's what they always do because it's about power and control. It's never about, okay, well, I'm just going to stop this one tactic. You know, it's pervasive through every single thing that they do. And speaking of which, there was a list.
What you just said before you move on,
Yeah.
that's a big part of why you always feel like you're on the verge of a breakthrough, because they'll tone down or stop one type of behavior and then switch to something else. So you feel for a little bit like you've made some kind of headway until you realize, no, not at all. They're just changed strategies on you. And that's part of what keeps that whole never quite there, hopeful dynamic, the malignant optimism, I think Sam Vaknin calls it.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's true.
Yep, I agree. And I think that's you're absolutely nailed it, because they do. We, you know, it's those little micro victories that make us feel like we're actually, things are progressing and that we're moving forward, but we're not. It's you know, Richard Grannon said when I did a live stream with him, and I will never forget it, he said it's always just different levels of the game. And he is so spot on with that. It really is. There's nothing there. I mean, it's like peeling an onion. You keep peeling it back and peeling it back and peeling it back. There is no prize in the middle. It's just you peel it until there's nothing left. It's just different levels of the game. There is no relationship at the core. It's just different levels of manipulation. So real quick, one of the things that they had said I found this interesting. Some of the reasons that a person that some situations that may be intolerable and that we should leave as soon as possible are if the abusive person is getting drunk or high and abusive. They stay argumentative when you refuse, like when you try to distance yourself. They act intimidating using gestures or intimidating language. So like punching a wall, talking about, oh, it would be terrible if your brakes went out. You know, nobody would miss you if you died. That kind of stuff. That's very intimidating, like wildly inappropriate stuff. Becomes destructive towards the house or towards your personal property, hurts or scares you, your children, or your pets, or gives you the silent treatment. I found it really interesting that they put the silent treatment up there with intimidation and being destructive. And I found that to actually be very validating that they added that to the list, because the silent treatment is really like the silent killer. It is so painful to experience that, because when you're on the receiving end of it, it's like you're just this sheet twisting in the wind, not knowing when are they going to reopen contact. The psychological and emotional devastation that comes from just being frozen out like that is tremendous. So I thought that was worth noting. So did you guys experience, with like this intimidating behavior or silent treatment, or the abuse?
Silent treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Silent
All of the
treatment
above.
can be horrible when it's not even that they're not answering your messages or calling you back, but when they're in the same room with you, especially if someone else is present and it's like you don't exist. They'll talk to the other people, but if you say something, it's like you didn't speak, or they might just make just minimal enough response to not let the other people really easily notice that. That's really hard to take.
Yes, I agree. And one of the comments in the chat was, silent treatment is still abuse. And I agree completely. Silent treatment is actually, kind of strangely enough, a form of verbal abuse. And it's powerful stuff. But what I found interesting about that was, out of all of the different forms of abusive behavior out there, the defining, the demeaning, the diminishing, the humiliation, there's dozens more different types of abuse that they would go with silent treatment. So I
Well, it's
think
a form of isolation.
Yeah.
And that is the worst torture there is isolation, and silent treatment is an aspect of that. That's why it's so horrible.
And it's a form of punishment. They're punishing you.
Yeah, exactly. And I would be texting him, asking him, what did I say wrong? What did I do wrong? And he would ignore the texts, and he'd let, significant time go by, I guess, whenever he felt my punishment was up. And then sometimes he would send a cute picture on my phone, but not like actual words, like I'm okay or anything. But he wouldn't answer me. So I was scrambling, trying to figure out, what did I say? And looking back now, I know he purposely started an argument and created the whole scenario. But at the time, I didn't know that's what he was doing. I thought I offended him and hurt his feelings. But it was so painful to be ignored like that. You'd almost rather have someone slap you than ignore you like that, because it's very painful. It is torture.
And then you have those complex ones where my mom, and I've had this at work with bosses, they will shut you out. They will, give you the silent treatment, but then they'll send their flying monkeys to kind of check in and test the waters to see they want to see if you're mad so they can report back. And you're sitting here like, well, why can't they come to me? But just to let you know, I'm not talking to you, but I'm going to send my people to nag you and I've had bosses who do that, and it just drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think, a lot of abusive people, if they are confronted with silent treatment,
Mhm.
well, of course, they often play dumb.
Mhm.
Or if they're talking to you, they'll play dumb. If they're not talking to you, they'll just give you that look of absolute disgust, like, why would I talk to you? And
Hmm.
that is, that's demeaning behavior. And then it kind of goes back to what the authors in this book were saying of, good people don't treat their partner or their friends this way. They don't treat you with contempt and disdain and humiliation. And they for sure don't have grooming behaviors like this. And so I just want to touch on this a little bit because I know this is an ongoing question for that people have is, well, Dana, isn't no contact the silent treatment? And the answer is no. And the difference is silent treatment is a form of abuse, and it's a grooming behavior. It's showing somebody it's a boundary push, and it's showing somebody, I'm punishing you for doing sometimes, and like you guys were talking about, sometimes there's no reason for it, but oftentimes it's because you've challenged them. You've asked a question that they felt you shouldn't have asked. Um, you know, like they felt challenged in some way, basically, and so now they're punishing you. And so silent treatment is a form of abuse. It's designed to groom a person and teach them how you should behave.
Mhm.
No contact is not abusive. It's a defense strategy, and it's designed to keep a person safe. Because once you see that this is a game, and it's a game that's insanity, that the only winning move is to not play, no contact is not playing. And of course, it's easier said than done if a person has children with them, or has to work with them, or kind of what have you. But if no contact is at all possible, that is the preferred way to go. It's self-protection. Now, the manipulative, abusive person will claim that you're being abusive, that you're immature, that you're manipulative, by cutting them out of your life, that they expected more from you, that why can't you just have a conversation like two adults? They're going to twist all of this. And so setting boundaries and demanding respect and realizing that you matter and that you are worth respect, it takes practice. But once you can get your 2 feet on the ground and get grounded in that, those games of manipulation can't knock you off guard so easily. But it's really until we can realize what manipulative behavior is and what boundaries are, that we're lost in this fog.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to know, with you guys, the abuse you experienced as adults, was it similar to experiences that you had in childhood, or how do you think you ended up getting tangled up with these people?
Yeah, it was similar, but not in an obvious way. It was subtly similar. I really only understood how similar it was afterwards.
Hmm.
Yeah, mine was very similar. The whole dynamic of my family with my mom just kept just replaying, whether it's at work, I would have that same dynamic with bosses, and then just the relationships. And mine is that covert kind where, they love, they love bomb you, and they get you into them, and, fulfilling that need of wanting to be acknowledged. And then the abuse starts, and it's just very subtle. And then until they're just flat out treating me like crap. And then it's like, wait a minute, this is exactly what used to happen at home. So yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's that feeling that'll come up. Oh, wait, this feels just like X
Mm.
thing from my childhood or past that was horrible. It's not, it doesn't look like the exact same situation necessarily, but that feeling will be there. And I can remember so many times I thought those actual words to myself, this feels just like X. And I didn't understand. I thought it was something wrong with me, that, well, why would I, these are not the same situation. What's my problem? But then again, the focus was always, I had to be the problem. So I was groomed to think that, which is kind of goes back into the whole dynamic of, this is the agreement. I'm the problem and you get all your needs met and I don't. That's the way it is.
I had never experienced a relationship like that one before, where I actually gave away my personal power like I did. I remember towards the end of the relationship telling family, I need to get my power back. I've given my power away. I don't feel it anymore, because I'd never felt that before in a relationship. If they ended mutually, and on we both went. This was a whole different dynamic. However, I did grow up in a home with an alcoholic father. So there were issues around living around that, with the elephant in the living room, and those issues in dealing with an alcoholic. And but I never, this type of narcissistic behavior I hadn't actually seen in my home. The ones that he used, the methods that he used against me. But looking back, I can see how my childhood did play into being attracted to this type of person, and continuing to put up with stuff that wasn't acceptable, and trying to fix him. And that those issues did relate to some things from childhood, even though I'd never actually seen his particular techniques before. Like, we didn't do silent treatment in my home, but I can see now where what led up to that.
Yeah, the first, I would say, abusive. The first abusive relationship I was in was with a guy when I was in high school, and I didn't realize what it was until probably 20 years later, when I began working at a domestic violence shelter, and I was going through training. Oh, it makes me like tear up even thinking about it. And I knew that what I had experienced at the time was so terrifying, but nobody else took it seriously. He was very intimidating, very threatening. He'd threatened to kill my brother if I, wouldn't go see him or spend time with him, or what have you. And it, he did this kind of subtle stalking for years after I left, and it just none of it made sense. It wasn't even that he was even that interested in me. It was that it was just it was all power and control, and it was all about, even though he was cheating on me nonstop, he didn't want me to ever move on.
Right.
And he would show up at my work. At the time, I don't know, I was young, and I was working at 7-Eleven, and he would show up there. And just around, I'd quit jobs. I had unlisted phone numbers, but I never went through anything even close to that in my childhood, or even his behavior. I never experienced anything close to that. But my attraction to him it was that love bombing, and it was all of that attention and affection. It made me feel so loved and so important. And hindsight's always 2020. And so it took a lot for me to leave, because I just kept taking him at face value time and time again. And it was things just got so Lifetime TV movie. It turned out he ended up going to jail, and he'd lied to me about his name, his age, everything. And it was absolutely, I was so embarrassed and ashamed that I'd gotten tangled up with him. And my friends thought I was stupid for staying and for going back. And so I quit talking to them about it. And it wasn't until I was at the domestic violence shelter and going through that training, and realized, okay, yeah, that really was problematic. I just started crying in the middle of training, and I had to get up and leave, because it was the first time that I felt validated for, yeah, what I went through was real. And it was, I was, me feeling terrified was an appropriate response to a really wildly inappropriate situation, and that I wasn't making too big of a deal out of things, that this guy really was psycho and I needed to get out of there. So even though none of his behavior was familiar, I guess the part of it that was familiar was that kind of that the attention and the no attention, and the
Mhm.
attention and no attention, and learning and kind of being groomed too of, if like to just always forgive somebody, to always try to make things work. And it's I'll be 40 in a few days, and realizing now, no, all of this social conditioning that I think so many of us go through, of always working towards a solution, doing whatever we can to keep a relationship together, that this is really this only holds true if it's healthy. Like if it's abusive, then that's a deal breaker. And it's like we're missing that piece when we're taught that, I think, growing up.
Well, that, and when you have that big empty bucket of love, attention, affection, and significance, that whole thing, and
Yes.
somebody gives you that, if you haven't experienced feeling that lack and then getting it dangled in front of you and taken away and dangled and taken away, I mean, you can't relate to it if you haven't lived that, I really believe. And you don't even know that that's even happening at that point. You have no, it gets to a point, it progresses to a point where you're really ground down emotionally before you start to even realize that. And that's what's so treacherous about it all. It's and it doesn't take much of an empty bucket for somebody to get sucked in by the right kind of person.
Completely. I agree completely. It's how people get involved with cults, or with gangs, or with abusive partners, abusive, controlling, power and control driven people in general, in whatever role that they might play, either an abusive partner or a cult leader, or you know a dictator. It just, yeah, if a person has some sort of unmet need, and then that need is being filled and then exploited, it's hard to walk away. It's hard to walk away when a need is being met. And for any of us at any given time, I think, regardless of our childhood, it's just kind of whatever unaddressed needs we have at that moment. But if they're long-standing needs that haven't been met, then we're just primed to get abused when we start dating.
Yeah. And knowing those red flags that you always talk about, that helped me with this shift. Love bombing, before meeting it was like, oh, that's so cute. He's texting me every 1 minute, and it's just so wonderful. But I had the experience this year with a coworker who we exchanged numbers, just for work and to text each other, because we were working in the big building. And he started sending me just texts all the time, and then it would be happy faces, and I started feeling uncomfortable, and I'm like, this guy is nuts. But before then, that would have been okay. Oh, he's nice, and then he would get upset when I didn't return his texts, but he would walk by my office if we had business. He would walk by my office, but he was trying to control me through the text. So I blocked his number, and then he had to come into my office. And then I had to eventually tell him, I'm uncomfortable with this. You have to communicate with me via the company's email, or you have to schedule an appointment. And after that, he didn't like me. We didn't talk in meetings. And I felt so powerful, because at first I thought he was a nice person and he was love bombing me. Oh, you're just the greatest psychologist ever, and you work so good, and just was giving me all these compliments. But this time, that's happened to me before, and I got, went down the wrong road. But with this one, I cut it off real short. I'm like, that's a red flag. No one does that. So knowing those red flags helps with, identifying these people, and then knowing how to quickly set that boundary. And it feels quite good, but it still feels kind of crazy when you have to be in the meeting with these people or deal with them, because then that little part of you like, I just want to work things out. I don't want bad blood between us. We work together, you know, we work so close together. But then I had to get to the point, like, I don't care. I don't owe him anything. And after that, I mean, he didn't like me after that. And so what?
Right. And so what?
Mm-hmm.
Because of course he doesn't, right? Because he couldn't get that power and control over you. So he can't get that supply from you. You're not a good target. If there's no target, the abuse has nowhere to land. I just love how they said that in the book. And it's so cool that now you can see, it's so interesting, right? When we start having these mindset shifts of, boy, before love bombing felt so ideal and so nourishing and even healthy. And now I see it as, boy, this is too much too soon. And this is kind of picking up this whirlwind situation. And then sure enough, things take a turn. And then the next thing you know, you're like, this is just really making me uncomfortable. I got to get out of here.
Yeah, it feels very disingenuous to me now. It just makes me very uncomfortable. Whereas at one time I would have eaten it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, someone loves me.
Right. Right. I think too, for me, one of the big reasons I think I had a hard time with boundaries and demanding, expecting respect was, I've been in the caregiving field since I was 15. So it started off with my grandmother who had dementia, who lived with us. And then, I worked with all kinds of, my developmentally disabled children and adults and behavioral adults. And I've worked with sex offenders and behavioral children and at-risk kids and domestic violence shelters. So and then a psychiatric nurse, and worked with all kinds of really extreme behavior. I mean, I've been attacked at work multiple times, stuff that most people don't normally ever experience, but that was my normal. And so I think my baseline for what was appropriate or workable was really skewed because of that, because I had just been in these really wild situations, on and off my whole life. I've only had, like I said, I worked at 7-Eleven. I've had a couple of like quote unquote normal jobs when I was younger, but pretty much it's all been like caregiving and getting, dealing with traumatized or traumatizing people and being way too tolerant for way too long with stuff. So, okay, let's move to Lucy's notes here. And so she had mentioned, this book, and I will mention this too. This book, depending, I think, on where you are in the healing process, can potentially come across as very re-victimizing, because they really draw a hard and fast line about, you're not a victim, you're not even a survivor, that you're a target. And that but the power in that is that we can stop being a target immediately. And I don't know. What did you guys think about that? What do you think about that?
I
liked
definitely.
I liked it.
Go ahead.
I just liked it. It was more empowering to think of myself as somebody who had been targeted than victim. Victim just has some very negative, powerless connotations to it. So I prefer the word target.
Me too.
Yeah,
As a matter
Marsha.
of fact,
Well, I like the word target. I understand where he's coming from. I also, like, I have suffered from depression for 25 years. So will tell people I'm a depression survivor. So I like that word, but I get it. I get where he's coming from with that you're being targeted and don't look at yourself as a victim that's helpless. I do get that and appreciate where he's coming from. But I almost think too, in my opinion, in order to start setting boundaries, because I can only think about my own relationship, you have to almost be at a certain point though with your self-esteem or your self-confidence before you can start setting boundaries with your abuser. Because like we were talking before the live stream, I wouldn't have dared set boundaries because I wanted to keep this guy. I didn't want to alienate him by saying, okay, if you do this, I'm not going out with you tonight. If you talk that way, or, et cetera. So in my perspective, in just my overall way of looking at the book is, you almost have to be at a certain place to be comfortable with setting a boundary with an abusive person who's got you totally, they've totally played with your mind and everything, and you're going to now stand up to them and set boundaries. It seems a little bit oversimplified to me, but I definitely get the use of terms, using the terms of target, definitely, because victims really got a bad sound to it. It's like, oh, you're a victim. It's like you're helpless, and we're not. We
But
just have
think
to
about
get
it, those toxic behaviors, narcissists, psychopaths, they don't really want to waste their time on people who, who's going to stand up to them and they have boundaries. So that's why they go through that testing period. So even with that situation, I found like he was testing me. So he would text me late at night at 10 o'clock. And then I wouldn't respond. And then the next day he would text me, oh, I'm so sorry. Is that okay? Just kind of seeing where my head was. And the first time or so, I'm like, oh no, that's a problem. But in my head, I was thinking, I'm just not going to respond. I'll respond the first, in the morning. And when I just didn't respond, then that's when I got the text. He was mad and giving me the silent treatment at work. And so we were going back and forth. It took about a month to go back and forth and establish that with him. But he went about his way. And I'm sure because I have a nice nature, I smile. Oh, I do. That's me. And so he built that off me. Whereas the person who was working there before me, I worked for a school district, he wasn't like that. And so he would always say, oh, you're so nice. I never came in this office when that last person was here, so just kind of grooming me and telling me. And I was just taking in my notes. I know what that is. You grooming me, but no, I'm going to smile right here at you, but I'm going to set my boundary with you. And that it's draining. I would go home days so tired and draining because I felt myself, setting that boundary that was really so hard. But when it did, I felt good about it. But I do feel like I'm a target because I am nice natured and I smile and no problem. Like I think Dana, you said that yesterday on the the live show. You smile and people's okay, oh, she's nice. Oh, I'm flexible, no problem. Just get it to me when you can. Not knowing that people are taking note, like, oh, we can get her. She'd be nice. I teach adult students in a graduate program, and this year, because I'm so flexible, I don't like having all these rules. I give them chance after chance after chance. Turn it in. You can turn it in. But what I learned, what I have to do is when I set something, it has to be that, because all that flexibility. So I told them up front, I said, I'm a very nice person. I'm flexible. I work with you guys. But if you guys turn in lessons, if you guys turn in something that's not up at the par that I expect, I will give you a failing grade. And I just said it like that. And their faces was like, oh my God. And then they're like, we're worried. But I could see on some people's faces, oh, like I could just turn in anything. So I'm learning certain ways. And then afterwards I went home, I felt bad because I'm like, well, I hope I didn't put a bad vibe out, out there in the universe and all this. But I'm like, no, you were just letting them know that, what your boundaries and what your expectations are.
But if you're really beaten down by psychological abuse,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be very difficult to all of a sudden go from, putting up with this stuff to setting boundaries
Yeah,
without some personal inner work being done to get to the place where you're comfortable to set boundaries. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, if you've been ground down to the point where you have absolutely no idea that you even can have an expectation, that's a long way from being able to set a boundary. And
valid point.
Yeah, I think that's a big stumbling block for a lot of people, is that you don't even know that you are allowed to do that, let alone set a boundary.
And I didn't know with mine, I didn't know I wasn't respecting myself by how I was treating him. I never thought of it as, oh, I'm not respecting me. I thought I was just doing my best, but it wasn't until I look back and I go, you know what? If I'd had more self-respect, I wouldn't have let him talk to me that way.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well said.
Hindsight's 2020. But definitely I could look back and say, why? Because I never thought I would end up in an abusive relationship. I thought I would know an abusive man right off the bat. But I was thinking of a certain type of one, like you see on TV, or the ones that are very physically abusive. This guy was like an ordinary, he was a nurse. He was the nicest person when you first meet him, the most regular guy. I never thought, that I would be fooled like this, because I thought, oh, I'll be able to tell him he's going to have like a look on his face, or he's going to be, no. So, but I didn't realize that I was actually, that he slowly was pushing my boundaries to see what I would tolerate. And I kept letting him push it further and further to where I wasn't even showing respect to myself and allowing him to treat me a certain way.
And then too, with me, is I've had to walk away from so many relationships. That's when it became problematic with me, is because, you let people just push your boundaries, or my analogy is they keep pushing you in the corner. They just push you in the corner, a little bit at a time. And then you in the corner, and like Dana said, you don't say anything. And then and you just go out and you just push, and like, I can't take it anymore. And then they're looking at, like, what's wrong with you? How dare you? And then it's like, it's hard to try to go back to the first line when they first cross that boundary and start setting it, until it just becomes overwhelming, and you just have to walk away and say, forget it. But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't learning the lesson. So I kept getting friendships like that and relationships like that. And I'm like, what is wrong? Like, I can't keep friends. And when that I started learning about narcissism, and then that word boundary, I'm like, what is a boundary? He was like, what? I heard of it before.
What is it? Define boundary.
No clue.
And you even I can look back now on people I knew like in my teens and my 20s and go, that person was a narcissist. That person wasn't respecting me. But I didn't see that at the time at all. It wasn't until I learned about narcissism and red flags and watching Dana and others, I'm like, oh, that's what that guy was doing. But you don't realize it sometimes when you're in it until you look back. But
yeah.
Completely. And Z, like you were saying, these little boundary pushes, this is how this stuff starts. And in the book, one of the examples they give is of a junior partner at a firm being asked by like a senior partner, hey, can you go get us coffee? And if if the junior partner is like, oh, and this would have been something I totally would have done. Like, oh, sure, no problem. What would you like? And they go run and get coffee. And that seems kind of benign enough, but it sets the precedent that you're an errand runner, like that you're going to
Right.
go run go run and get coffee. And that sets the tone for the dynamic of that relationship. And so, and then they had said, a better way for them to handle it if they wanted to be treated with respect and seen as more of an equal, to say, you know what, I really don't have any time, but if you find somebody, put me down for a mocha. And so I think it can be really helpful to see these little subtle boundary pushes for what they are, because so many times I think with
That
learning,
was one of my favorite examples.
yeah, mine too. I thought that was very
Yeah,
eye-opening.
it's good.
If we can see the subtle things, because again, I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, that's so me. I tend to just be very, quote unquote, go with the flow, and kind of navigating having a personality like that, but then realizing ways that can be pushed into something that's not healthy. And so I think let's talk about that for a little bit, about some of, hindsight being what it is, some of these early boundary pushes that we've experienced in some of our relationships, and what we experienced then and how we would handle it now.
What comes up for me is the going back to childhood and how in my family dynamics, I was groomed to take care of everybody. Oh, I have it. I can do it. And that's how I felt like I was seeking approval from my parents. And, oh, if you did this, oh, Z, she'll go do it. And I would do it. And people call me for money. So it's just something that's something that I have to work on, because when I'm doing it and I'm being nice, at work, oh, I'll do it. I'll buy everybody, but I'm trying to get that approval. And it's like you said, it's people seeing that that's a boundary. Like, oh, we can, she'll do anything, or they'll do something that a miscommunication, and instead of me saying, you know what, I didn't like that, and I don't prefer that, I'll just let it slide and say, oh, no problem. Oh, it's no problem. Everything. And that those little things, not just for the standing up for the first time, then it just, like you said, it's just those little bits. But what I figure with me, it's the things that I struggle with, because I really enjoy helping. I really enjoy, I don't like to be in confrontation, but what I have to tell myself now is, no, you have to, some things you just, if you want to be a bit better person, and I want to say better, but you want to get different results and you want people to see you a different way, you have to be a different way. But then I see narcissists and toxic people be assholes and treat people like crap and be mean. And then I'm like, well, I don't want to be that. So I struggle with wanting to have this persona that I have boundaries and that I'm powerful and this, versus I don't want to be that kind of way. So it's just balancing that. And I say, it's probably better I stay on this side of saying, no, setting the boundaries all the time until I feel comfortable with where I can be flexible with things and people would not run over me.
I agree. And you had mentioned earlier too, that I thought that was a good one, because I see this similar things over and over and over again in the support group. People like, a new person that you're dating texting you in the middle of the night, or expecting you to get back to them right away. It's the whole, I say jump, you say how high. And it's that boundary push early on, that it might not seem like that, but and then realizing, I value my sleep. I'm worthy of valuing my sleep. My phone is off between 10 and 6, and I'll get back to you when I can. And to also not, when we're dating somebody, if they're getting upset that you don't have your phone glued to your hand and that you're responding within 10 seconds, those are some major red flags. And it's that boundary push. And they're basically in effect saying, whenever I want you, are you going to be there? So
People who have a lot of expectations of you and don't seem to welcome any expectations, that's an automatic high up on my deal breaker list right there.
Yeah.
And I've learned something at work. What I do with those kind of demanding, controlling bosses is when they call you or they have a request, because I get triggered and I'll start shaking because I feel like if I feel that imbalance of power, they'll call me. I want something now. And I would run, oh, let me go, I'm gonna get in trouble. But what I've learned to do is, I say, you know what? I say, can you give me a minute? I'm just in the middle of something. I'll be right there. I will wait 20 to 30 minutes. I will go in the bathroom. I'll do everything just to set that presence. And I'm not saying I'm all there. And these are little things that I'm learning, and I don't do it all the time, but it's a coping skill that helps me and it feels more powerful. And then I can calm myself down. And then I'll wait, and then I'll go in there. And then even if she'll be sending people, they say you need to come to the office and this, I'll be right there. And then I'll go in, oh, you need me? Where were you? I called you 30 minutes ago. I said, oh, I was what do you need? I said, I was in the middle of something. And then they look at me and they don't want anything. It's about control. But I used to run, and then I'll be flustered, and then they can feed off my nervous energy. So I had to start giving myself time to say, wait a minute, I know what this is all about. This is someone who's trying to control me, trying to press my boundaries. And I'm a school psychologist, and I work in schools. So you get these administrators and bosses who get in these positions because they want to take total control. It's sickening at times. I've worked with a lot of them. So they come and they're finding people who they can pass those boundaries and who can I control. And before all of this, because I've been abused, I didn't really have a good experience doing something that I love, because I kept running. I love working with the kids, but running into people like that who was really just really emotionally abusing me, and I didn't feel powerful. But what I'm learning from the get-go, as soon as they start, they come in, I go back to work next week, I'll get my assignment. I may be working in a high school, and I tell myself, okay, who the people around here want to control me? And in the beginning, when they start trying to do things inappropriate, or I'm gonna have to set those boundaries just to help me, just establish myself and not wait till the last end of the school year and it's out of control like I used to do. But sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes it's just, and I'm like, why do I have to deal with this? Why things just can't, I just go to work and meet people and they're not trying to control me and push my boundaries, because I would never want, to me, I look at people, I listen to people, they tell me what they don't like. Sometimes they don't even have to tell me, and because I'm not wanting to, just make people's lives a living hell. And I just don't understand people who just wants to control people and just push their boundaries and things like that. I just don't understand it, and that's the frustrating part for me.
It's because they feel more powerless than we do.
Yeah.
But you can even look back like into childhood, like as certain teachers that I had even in grade school. I remember I can look back and say, they exhibited some signs of narcissism. Maybe they gave you looks, or they talked to you a certain way. So I just didn't know what that was until now that I'm educated about narcissism. I can now look back and say, oh, that's what that person was doing. And it makes so much more sense now. And how many different times someone was basically demeaning me or trying to control me, and I didn't see it at the time, all the way back into childhood.
Mm-hmm. And Z, you touched on a really great point too, with setting boundaries and feeling, kind of going into that fight or flight mode where you're exhausted by the end of the day, or that you're having to go into the bathroom and calm yourself down. And we find ourselves like rehashing the situation, or feeling like, did I handle that okay? And it's just, it's so time consuming and so energy consuming to set boundaries, especially at first. And it is something that gets easier the more we do it. But at first it does, we tend to feel bad and mean. And especially, and this is why I talk a lot about, it's so important for us to know what's healthy for us and to move in that direction instead of looking towards what's normal, because normal is often different shades of dysfunction.
Right.
So like with you in your school environment, if everybody else is kind of, you know, kowtowing to these administrators and they're like,
They
well,
do.
I'll just stay late and I'll come in during lunch and you know, we can just make this work and anything for the team, right? They're making it seem like that. And then you're like, well, I guess a jerk because I'm not a team player if I actually want to go take a lunch or leave at 5. And to realize, okay, no, this is not normal. I need to do what's healthy. I don't care what everybody else is doing or what they think. I'm just going to set this boundary and assert myself. And yeah, a lot of other people will look at you and they'll use those feelings because they've got their own issues too of thinking,
Right.
well, you know, you're just not a team player, or I can't believe you talked to the boss like that or somebody else. And it's hard. It's really hard to keep our 2 feet on the ground and to stay grounded and realize, yeah, you know, I respect me. And part of respecting me is I respect my energy and I respect my time. And, you know, like I'm not going to get involved with people or situations that are just a big time suck, or, you know, I'm not going to go in on holidays or weekends or nights or for free and kind of be exploited like that. Like, I'm a professional. I have my time. I have my schedule. I expect to be treated like a professional. I would extend that same courtesy to somebody else.
And that goes back to what Marcia was saying about having your confidence and knowing your worth and that your energy is important. And you need that. And so I used to be that person where, you know, whatever the bosses wanted me to do, you know, wherever I worked, and you would have those people who, I'm not doing that, no, and then they would challenge and why are they being difficult? And now years later, I really respect those people because they would be the ones that the bosses would leave alone. It would just be the ones who are just doing whatever. So I had to, everything I do now, even though to me, it seems like it's okay, it's always a thought. Okay, how is this? What are you communicating about you and how you want to be treated? Even if, like you said, it's going to go get somebody coffee, or I'll walk down to Subway and get everybody sandwiches, which, you know, that's this thing. I love to do that for people, but I have to say no. And I told my students, we have a class on Saturday, and it's like an 8-hour class, and I'm getting excited. I'm like, oh, I'm going to feed them, and you know, I'm going to bring them something to eat because we're going to be working all day. And I thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, why are you doing that? And we brought it up, and they said, well, do you need to bring food? And they said, you know what? We'll do a potluck. We'll bring the food. And I said, okay, this is a good group because then they're not going to, you know, put it all on me. It's going to be more so of a group thing. And so I saw that as a shift in me and my thinking, because then, you know, they came a part of it. Whereas before I would be doing it all and then be resentful. You know, I just have to do everything. Well, I was putting myself out there, and they took it.
Yeah. And I think that's an important thing too, is paying attention to how we feel. So one of the early warning signs that a boundary has been violated is that feeling of resentment and that we're being taken advantage of. And then that feeling progresses into anger, rage, and it keeps going. And then there's physical symptoms that develop, and we're trying to cope with being we're overgiving and they're overtaking. And it's so depleting. Lucy, are you comfortable with sharing some of your, like, hindsight being what it is, boundary pushes that you've experienced in your past?
Sure. I was so acclimated to being raised by a narcissist that I had no idea. I mean, I was just totally clueless. I knew by the time I left home at 16 that whatever was happening there wasn't right. So I had a very long list of, I won't do this, I won't do that, I won't do this, as far as like how I'm going to raise my children, how I'm going to treat my children. how I'm going to treat other people. But I had a complete blank of what was the right way to be treated. What is the right way?
Mm.
So I only had half the solution. So I also knew that I didn't want to be married to someone who was like that. And on the surface, I didn't marry someone like that, but underneath, it turned out they were twins. I mean, and then also I stayed in contact with my family, even though I just kept trying, as like you were bringing up, Z, that you felt like you should. This is family. You should do this. You should try to get along. You should put up. You should forgive and forget. You know, and so I guess I was just very acclimated to it. I don't know how else to put it, that I was numb to boundary pushes.
What were some of the early boundary pushes that you might have experienced with friends or men, boyfriends over the years? Or coworkers even? Can you think of any like small, like hindsight being what it is, looking back and thinking, man, it didn't register then, but it kind of registers now?
I'm not sure I'm there yet. I mean, I can do identify overt.
Okay.
You know, like I'm saying, screaming, yelling, pushing, shoving, deviousness, manipulation. I can identify that, but the small things, I'm not sure I could see them today. I am not involved in a relationship with anybody. I have very few, and the ones I have are deep, very deep. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm there yet.
That's okay. And I think everybody, you know, kind of, you know, applies this, and there's so many pieces to this puzzle. And, you know, one person, it's like, it really is like a jigsaw puzzle. Like one person might really have the outer edges all figured out. The other person's got a big chunk of the left-hand corner all figured out. And another person's got the top part figured out. And I think that's kind of the benefit of these group conversations is, you know, we don't have to know how everything fits together all at once. And it's hearing about the other pieces of the puzzle that people have put together that can be so helpful. It's like, oh man, I didn't even connect that about somebody, you know, texting me at midnight, or that asking me for coffee could be, you know, how that could be misconstrued, even if they seemingly have good intentions, how that could come across as inappropriate. Or you know, one of the things for me was with Jack. He, right out of the gate, he would call me like Principessa. He had pet names for me right out of the gate. And so calling me like princess, or he would sign his texts XXX, like little kisses. And we hadn't even met yet. And so using pet names, hun, babe, you know, signing texts with little X's, things like that. That's a form. Those are big time boundary pushes, and they might be kind of glossed over as, oh, well, that's just their culture. They're European, or they're just really friendly, or, well, you know, they're older, or, well, you know, they're younger. That's just how, you know, it's, so there's all these different ways that we can kind of justify, or try to at least rationalize, these strange things that we're experiencing. But it's not appropriate. Pet names, that level of closeness is something that should happen over time. And if somebody's right out of the gate calling you hun, babe, sugar, toots, sweetie, signing text, kisses, XOXO, it's a sign of him. It's inappropriate and it's immature and it's a big red flag.
What I learned is when I was younger, I was just so full of life, and I was traveling and I was in college, and the older guys, I would attract those older guys who would want to come and be nice to me. And right off the bat, they would have money, and they want to buy me stuff, and let me take you to this expensive restaurant, and you be like, oh, it's nice. But now that I'm older and I think back to those relationships, that was so inappropriate, and letting these guys know that, all I have to do is give her, a little money and take her to a nice restaurant, and, she's all smiles and I can just do whatever I want. So just those little things that people think, oh, that's being nice. If you getting involved with some manipulative person or narcissist, there are so many underlying agreements you have no idea you're a part of, and they just putting the bait out to you. So that just over the years, I had to learn that, and to even now when I'm dating or just with girlfriends, less when we go out, I want to pay my own way. I don't want to be a victim, oh girl, I got you. No, I'm going to pay for my own, because then I've had friends in the end, they're like, oh, I'm doing all this for you. And I'm like, well, you offered to pay. What's the problem? So I had to learn that lesson too. You just take care of you. You're not in all the societal stuff to tell you, oh, a man has to pay, or, friends could do all of this. And not that I'm setting up all of these rules, but like you said, if it doesn't feel right to me, whatever I've been taught or my belief system, I'm going to do something, that feels right for me.
Yes. And on that note, I think with dating too, let me just touch on this a little bit. So there's this whole kind of, law of reciprocation.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this in, if you go car shopping, what do? They invite you in. Can I get you a drink?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this whole kind of sales technique behind this, that if you give somebody something right away, they're going to feel obligated to give something back to you. And what they're asked, so that whole kind of dance is, I'm going to give you a bottle of water, but I'm basically expecting time in return. This is seen, and when you go on a date, if a guy is trying to buy you, or I guess a gal, somebody's trying to buy you a drink, they're basically saying, I'm buying you a drink in exchange for your time. Mm-hmm. And so there's that sense of obligation there that we might not even be aware of. And so I have found when meeting people, especially people online, for men and women, it can be really helpful to meet at a coffee shop. As a woman, just to try to avoid an uncomfortable situation, I would try to get there 15 minutes or so early, buy my own coffee.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And then sit at the table, because, I don't know them. They're a total stranger. I don't want to feel obligated to stay longer, or for whatever, if they buy me a cup of coffee, which I would. So buy my own cup of coffee and then have them get their own drink. Just keep it light, kind of no expectation, no obligation, and then go from there. And I think for men too, that can be a warning sign. If a woman's expecting the first date to right out of the gate, especially if it's online and you haven't met, and she's expecting this you to buy dinner and there to be this whole production, for guys to take a few steps back and just say, let's just meet for coffee. Yeah. And then however they're comfortable with the whole, who's paying or whatnot. But I think that can be a good way to realize, like, okay, what situations am I feeling obligated in that I'm not going to be comfortable setting a boundary? So Shay, how about you? What kind of early boundary pushes have you noticed?
I've experienced some of what everyone, excuse me, has said. Something I would add is there's been a lot of experience for me where little tiny subtle things have caused me to make me feel like I need to prove myself, or that's how I interpreted it. It's hard to think of a specific example that wouldn't just sound ridiculous. But just even some friend when you're a kid saying, how come when I do that, you always do the same thing? Now you can take that as, well, but that's not what I was doing. And they don't listen to you. So you feel like you've got to prove it. You know, those little situations that can be so microscopic can put you on this kind of one down defensive, always trying to establish yourself. And that, to me, I think is where a lot of power and control really starts. It's just on that very subtle shift, which is why I liked that example they gave about getting the cup of coffee. You would think, why would it be a problem if I just want to be nice and get a cup of coffee? Ideally, it oughtn't be a problem. But when the world is populated with people who do take advantage, it is a problem, unfortunately. And some of us didn't really have any education in a positive sense of that. We didn't have any early enough sense of empowerment to start from, that we ever knew we were empowered. And that's been one of the biggest learning curves for me, is learning that I'm never obligated unless I specifically obligate myself. If I say I'm obligating myself to do this, then I'm obligated. Until I do that, I'm not. And I don't have to feel bad about it. But that took a whole lot of work. I mean, a lot of work to get to that point. And I'm not going to say I'm 100% there, but I'm a whole lot closer.
Yeah.
But,
You know, and I think with dating too, it's like, I think a lot of women, myself included, you know, if a guy does plan a really nice date and takes you out for a nice dinner or what have you, then there can be that physical expectation of, I'm going to expect a kiss at the end of this date or even more. And kind of like what Z was saying with even friends, kind of setting that even playing field. So same with me and my friends, we either each pay our own, or we'll do things like, okay, I'll get it this time, you get next time.
Yeah.
And there's that give and take, and we're always very aware. So it's not too one-sided either way.
it's always trouble when someone has an expectation out of nowhere that you have not actually made an agreement of, well, how are we going to do this? Okay, let's do this, where you communicate that. And a lot of people do have expectations, and a lot of people don't have expectations. And when you get those two together, it's trouble.
Yes.
That's why you have to really work on for me, I had to work on myself. I was traumatized by the dating websites because I was out there, you know, on them before pre-narcissist knowledge, after, you know, just recovering from all the abuse from my family. And I ran across all the games, and you know, now I'm a stronger person. I know about red flags, but it's what Shay was saying, an example of that, trying to prove yourself. My last boyfriend about 1.5 years ago, that's when I learned, okay, you have to set your boundaries with the physical part. You know, we're just dating, you know, we got in a relationship. I'm not ready for, you know, that next level. And so he kept trying to push me. So then his tactic was, well, you're just not affectionate like I am, and you're cold, and what person did a job on you, you know? And then I was like, instead of kicking up with my boundaries, saying, I don't care, I started, oh, I don't want him to feel like I'm this monster. So then, you know, I started letting him hug me a little more, and just, and then after that relationship, he was the worst narcissist, that last one. And I had started reading up on narcissism during that last part. And when I started reading about it, I cut him off, because I'm like, oh my, then I got really scared. But I remember I was trying to prove to him, like, no, I'm affectionate. And then I'm like, no one has ever said that about me. I'm really a nurturer. I'm loving, but in my head, but that was him just trying to manipulate me so he can get what he wanted, which was my power, my affection.
Yes. And that's a very common way for them to do it. So what if that love bombing, if if they can't get what they're after with the love bombing, then they'll switch. So when you do try to set a boundary and say, oh, I don't know, it's a little too much too soon, or it's making me uncomfortable.
Mhm.
If the love bombing doesn't work, then they switch tactics, and it's more of a, like you were saying, boy, somebody really did a number on you, or, I'm not your last guy. I'm not abusive. I'm not going to hurt you. Pushing, pushing, pushing. Somebody, you've got issues from your past, or I can see, or it can come across as concern. I can really see that you have all these issues from your past, but I'm not that way. You've really got to, don't be afraid to love. Don't be afraid to open up to me, to make it seem like you're the one with this issue. And it's like, it's not an issue, it's a boundary. And sort of like Marcia was saying, too, with the strategies in this book, these are great, like ahead of time. It would be, I was, as I was reading it, I found myself thinking, boy, it would be really, really difficult for a person to be in that spider web of manipulation to be able to apply any of these strategies, or to have the confidence or self-worth or the clarity to apply these strategies, not to mention that depending on the relationship, it could put them in danger. And Lucy had mentioned in her notes too, she said, because, okay, so one of the things in the book is the authors, and I totally agree with you on this, Lucy. The authors had said that they advocate for people trying to work on the relationship while they're in the relationship. So to not leave a verbally or emotionally abusive relationship. And I couldn't disagree with that anymore, because, kind of like what Z was saying, first off, you're exerting tremendous amounts of energy, even setting small boundaries, and that absolutely wears a person down. It's hard enough to set a boundary with a person who's not, maybe even not even trying to push your boundaries, but it's absolutely can be overwhelming and exhausting when a person's actively pushing your boundaries and trying to manipulate you. And the situation can very quickly go from verbal abuse to physical abuse. So yeah,
That
Lucy.
was that was Shelley Marshall's experience. She was actually married to a man who was abusive, and she implemented these strategies midstream, sort of out of the blue, like you're talking about, where it hadn't been her normal behavior in the past, and she began to implement them, and the result was that he left in the end. That he left the relationship. She did not leave. He did.
Yeah, and I think
But
there's
the good thing about it, though, and I can't stress this enough for myself, is that if you can do this, that you end up, even if you don't keep the relationship, you do end up keeping your self-esteem.
That's right.
But if you lay down and turn yourself into a doormat, you're not going to have any self-esteem, and you're also going to still lose the relationship. So I would say it's better.
Yeah, and a lot of people have lost their self-esteem by the time they get to the point where they realize there really is a problem that's maybe beyond just them. And that's a place where you can't read this book and really not find it. I just think somebody would either feel too blamed or just not really understand how they could possibly implement any of that, because it's not, when you're starting from scratch and you're learning that and you're approaching newer relationships with those ideas, that's a lot less overwhelming than if you've got somebody who's really grinding you down daily and trying to even make a little stand in that situation. Is just without a whole lot of support and already having built up some self-esteem, you're just not going to be there. And that's the one place where I found this book to be less really geared toward people really in that, and more helpful to people either who haven't gotten that far into it or are recovering it at one of those other ends. I think is where this information is the most valuable as it's presented.
I agree
Right.
completely.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree too. I think though, by starting out by saying that the approach is to try to first save the relationship, the only benefit I see in that is I know when I first started exploring what was going wrong in my relationship with my narcissist, I would have liked hearing that because I wanted to know that maybe there was a way to save the relationship. And if I'd have had this book and gone forward setting boundaries, then it would have evolved from there. But I would have been maybe not so open to something telling me right off the bat, oh, this is abuse, you need to get out of this relationship. I think a lot of times people are looking for, what can I do to salvage this relationship? I love this person. And they're telling me, okay, well, let's start our approach. Instead of starting right off the bat with, oh, this guy's a jerk, here's how to get rid of him. It's like, well, maybe we can salvage this relationship by doing XYZ, by setting boundaries and creating consequences. And in some cases, it's worked. Some of the people he's discussed in the book, actually did change. Oftentimes we know narcissists don't, but I would have liked hearing that in the middle of the abuse situation that, hey, why don't you look at this, give this a try, maybe this can be saved. So I kind of looked at it from that perspective. But when I first read that about saving it, it struck me because of the whole thing with narcissism. But I can see another side of that as well myself.
I agree. I think the person's behavior would really have to be on like the more mild, like the extreme mild end for these strategies to work. If they're raging at a person and screaming and yelling and um really, if there's like that level of rage, I don't even know. I think frankly, I'm just hard pressed to even believe that people radically change. I just think they switch tactics. And the people that say, oh yeah, my partner doesn't do that anymore, it's like, well, how are you measuring success? Like, is it successful because he or she's not raging at you anymore? But I have never once seen or heard of anybody going from an abusive person switching that mindset to them treating their partner with dignity and respect. Like that, going from that power and control win-lose mindset to a team player mindset, it's not. But I agree with you. I think people
Very rare.
need to try, like they need to be
Yeah,
able
I think
to
it's,
leave the relationship when
yeah.
they're, have that line in the sand, get really crystal clear with the changes that you need to see happen and in a time frame that you need to see them in. And then you'll know
Well, I think
when the time is to leave.
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people need the chance to really feel they've done everything they can, and
Yes.
to get to that point where they understand that they have tried everything, they have worked on themselves in the relationship, and there's nothing
Exactly.
left to be done. And
Exactly.
that point's going to be different for everybody in
Right.
every situation, but I think that it's often very necessary.
I
And
did
most,
that.
and yeah, most targets, they do want to save the relationship initially. They do want to save it. They don't realize necessarily they're dealing with a narcissist. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Lucy, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just saying I did that. I had to exhaust all avenues and possibilities before I was willing to say, okay, this can't be salvaged. There's nothing to be done. I have to leave.
And I think a lot of us have been there.
I was reading Lucy's notes where she mentioned the 3 basic steps taught on how to set a boundary. Pause and choose, set boundaries, implement consequences. So I would
Right.
think that consequence is very important, because you can set a boundary, and especially those who love to, you set a boundary, they're still trying to push that boundary and that boundary. So sometimes it is just walking away or reiterating, okay, if you do this, I'm going to do that, and do it, and not go back and forth with it.
the consequence has to be done too. He said something to the effect of start with like a small boundary, or however he put it, just something that you know for sure you'll follow through on. Before you get to maybe a bigger boundary, like, okay, if you do that again, I'm going to sleep in the other bedroom or something like that. To start with something smaller. And because you absolutely have to follow through on that consequence, or it's going to be a joke, and they'll know, oh, they can just keep pushing you and you'll give in.
Right. And then
So-
you're back to square one again. And then all that work has been undone. It's just like with the child, if a parent is, they're getting upset and they're like, that's it, no TV for a month, and you do it again 2 months. Well, are they really going to hold to that consequence? Probably not. And so giving a consequence to not instill fear in somebody, but something that you can actually, that you're going to follow through on. So to say something like, okay, that's it. You talk to me like that again, you're losing your phone for the rest of the evening, or you're losing your phone for this weekend, or you're not getting allowance, or you're not going out this weekend. Or with a narcissist, with an adult, to say something like, I am not going to tolerate being talked to like that. So like, if you are getting silent treatment, I don't do silent treatment. I see it for what it is. It's not okay. So I'm going to go turn on the radio now, or I'm going to go out to dinner with some friends of mine, but I'm not going to sit here and have you freeze me out, and then for you to distance yourself. And then the book talks about that too, with saying, okay, I'm going to leave now. Like you're yelling at me, you're calling me names. If this continues, I'm going to leave. That oftentimes people feel like, targets feel like, well, that's not fair. Why should I have to leave? But then the answer is because we only have control over us. We don't have control over them. So being like, okay, I can leave. And how a lot of abusive people will feel like you're being controlling, you're being manipulative, you're being mean because you're trying to get me to change. And they had said in the book, which I thought was really great that they talked about this, they said, no, you can keep doing whatever you want to do. I'm changing me, and I'm changing how I respond to your behavior. But like the story with the gal who ended up, her husband left because she was setting boundaries. That's what happens. Like when you change the dance, if you guys are used to doing the cha-cha, and then all of a sudden you start doing, I don't know, salsa dancing or something, they don't know how to react to it. And so it knocks them off balance, oftentimes to where they're really uncomfortable. And then they and just like a child, they'll escalate. If you tell a 4-year-old, no, you're not getting that toy, they have they start crying, they start begging, mommy, I love you, mommy, please, I'll do anything, I'll be so good, I'll clean my room, I'll walk the dog. They're love bombing you, right? And then if you still hold to it, then it's this level 10 meltdown where you're having to carry this child out of the store, being like, we're not doing this, but so many parents, and I get it, will break down and just be like, oh, just get the toy. I'm so sick of this. And they want to avoid the level 10 meltdown. It's like with a narcissistic spouse, they want to avoid things progressing to that point. But we have to get to the place too, where we might love them, but we have to love ourselves more.
Right.
And especially loving ourselves enough to walk away from something that's destructive, because abuse is not love, and love is not abuse. And
a lot of those toxic people I've seen in relationships where they study you, and I've had boyfriends where, I'll get upset, they won't call me and I won't hear from them. And, I'm yelling, you didn't call me, and, I'll give them the silent treatment for weeks and weeks. And then I calm down and they call me, oh, hi, beautiful. And then we're playing that cycle again. So what I was teaching them is, oh, all I have to do is give her a little time and then she's going to be okay with it. And then I'll go back to being unconscious. Well, it's really not a bad relationship and just being miserable. And I remember hearing one of my guy friends at work, he was telling me about his relationship. His girlfriend, they were living together. After Thanksgiving, she moved out, cut him off, and he's like, what happened? And I'm thinking, oh, she's been on you. He said, all I have to usually do is when she get mad, just wait a minute and take her out to dinner, and then we'll be back, we'll be okay. So he never changed his behavior. So that consequence of her leaving really woke his eyes up. And that's why I feel like having those consequences in dating or in relationships, whether it's romantic or even with friends, they have to know, okay, if I do this to Z, she's gonna follow through on it, whether it's little or big. And I've been really bad at that.
And you have to be prepared to lose the relationship when you set consequences. You definitely have to be prepared. It's part of the deal. Even if you don't necessarily want to lose the friendship, you may, because of the consequence or the boundary that was set, but that's important. It's part of respecting yourself. Usually does involve losing people in your life when you start respecting yourself and putting yourself, forward first.
And I think it's important too to realize, if a person keeps pushing your boundaries and they don't respect your boundaries, they don't respect you. And if they don't respect you, then there is no relationship there. It's all about what can they take from you. So realizing that we're the ones in our mind, we're like, well, but this is my relationship and I've got to make it work. We're the only one putting in all the effort, and it's not a relationship if it's a one-sided dynamic where they always get their way. It's a manipulationship. It's all smoke and mirrors, and there's nothing there. And it takes a person a long time to get to that place where they fully realize that. It just takes a while. But that's what it is at the end of the day. If there's no respect for your boundaries, there's no respect for you. There's no respect for you. There's no relationship.
So if they're walking away, you never had a relationship in the first place.
Exactly.
You just thought you did. So that's an excellent point, Dana. So the people that will leave when you start respecting yourself and setting boundaries are the ones where there was that element was missing of respect anyway. So yeah.
Right. There's nothing there for you to lose.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, some things I think need to just be flat out deal breakers. And I've mentioned this a couple times in this live stream so far, but they said, a good person does not treat their spouse or their friend or their child really with disdain, hostility, or criticism. And so if you're being treated like that, it's not so much an issue of setting a boundary. It's more of, at that point, it's jumping to, I need to have some sort of consequence and cut this person out of my life, because these are acts of aggression and you're being targeted. They cover in the book, I like this, different faces of an abusive relationship. And there's maybe about, 10 or so. I'll go through them real quick here, but some signs that you're in an abusive relationship. General disapproval. There's a pattern of anger, hostility, and criticism towards you. Their disapproval of you is general in nature, but becomes more pronounced when you have an opinion that differs from theirs. Number 2, you can never make this person happy. What might have made him happy last week upsets him this week. Yeah. It's always a moving target. You walk on eggshells. Your home never feels safe because of their outbursts and criticisms. You feel better without them being around because you don't have to constantly monitor your words and feelings. Number 4, you feel micromanaged. Everything you do is monitored and you can do nothing right. Number 5, they don't care what you think, what your plans are, or how you feel. They might ask about your past so they can later use it against you in a fight. You talk about their work, their programs, their politics, their friends, etc. Number 6, you can't discuss anything. When you try to talk about your problems, They get angry and blame you, telling you that you are crazy or imagining things. They give you the cold shoulder or say that they don't know what you're talking about. Number 7, they rewrite history. They deny what you heard and claim you said things that you didn't. They blame you for marriage troubles or family troubles and accuse you of having evil motives against them. Number 9, you can't get through to them. No matter how hard you try, you can't get through to them in a meaningful or lasting way. His or their response confuses you because your words are twisted and manipulated to put them in a superior position and to make you wrong. You believe that if you could just get them to understand how you feel, that things would change. If you can identify with any of these, you are being targeted. A good person would not treat their spouse or with disdain, hostility, or criticism. I love that.
Yeah.
I thought that really cleared up a lot of confusion about it, especially if a person's in a relationship where they're not being called names, where they're not being yelled at, when they're not being hit or other more like overt signs of abuse. But let me add to that too real quick about overt and covert. The more aware you become of abusive behavior, the less covert it is.
Right.
You'll start seeing it crystal clear. And then, but that's its own level of crazy making, because then your coworkers, your friends, other family, they don't see it. And then it's this maddening thing of like, really? Like this couldn't be any more obvious. But so once you wake up, it's really hard. It can be very frustrating to realize that other people just aren't awake to it. And
it's like the energy changes between you and that person once you realize what's going on.
Yes.
Where at first it's a little bit more comfortable, and then you see them and it's like, I know what you're up to, and then they know, and then that's when it's out. You have to deal with it, or it's over.
Yes, completely. And so there's 3 other steps to the setting boundaries part. Let's see here. So they, I think Z, you were reading it before, but they were saying, you choose your response. And what they meant by that in the book is you're at this crossroads right now. When you pause and you choose, do you go back to the dance that you danced before of saying nothing or yelling or whatever your role is in that? Or do you take a new approach and do you assert yourself? And so if you assert yourself, then that moves on to step 2, which is asserting the boundary of, I'm not going to be treated like this. This is not okay with me. And then also to add into that, it's about addressing the behavior. It's not okay to be yelled at instead of saying, you always do this, or you're such a bully. Instead of attacking like them, focusing on the behavior. It's not okay. I'm not okay with being yelled at. I don't tolerate the silent treatment. This isn't going to work for me. And the third part is having that actionable consequence that you can hold to. And so they talk about that. The first part of boundaries with choosing our approach is always coming from that standpoint of choose to demand respect. I love that. It's about us. It's not about them. It's really not about them. It's about us. Like I insist, I expect, and I insist to be treated with respect, and that this is how things are going to go down. I'm not going to tolerate this. So I liked that our default position always needs to be coming from that place of strength and from that place of, I deserve to be treated with respect. It's a basic human right. Also knowing too with abusers that they will twist this and say things like, oh, well, no, respect is earned. It's not just given, and you haven't earned it. Or I would treat you respectfully if you earned it. And so to think ahead and try to come up with some ways to assert that and say, no, that is not true. You know, have, and just kind of off topic a little bit, but there's a difference between having respect for somebody and being treated respectfully. Having respect for somebody is something that's earned. You know, if it's another person, I might not have respect for their politics or their management style or their position or what have you, but I'm still, that basic human right of treating them respectfully is always there. So there's that difference. So don't let them knock you off balance with that, thinking that you have to earn being treated respectfully. You don't. And
Interesting
another,
to stop and think for 1 second what it would be like if we said, no, you have to earn my respect.
oh wait,
Yeah.
Shay, there?
Wouldn't it be interesting if we turned that around and said, no, you really do have to earn my respect and you're not earning it right now?
Right.
That would work.
Yeah, you know, it's, I'm just not going to tolerate being treated like this. And if they accuse you of trying to control their behavior, to let them know, no, I'm controlling my response to your behavior. You can act however you want to act, but now I'm controlling my response. And they also mentioned never get to the place, you don't have to defend or explain.
Right.
It's, again, basic human right to be treated with dignity and to be treated respectfully. And if they start yelling or start trying to knock you off balance, saying, oh, well, you're not perfect, and look at all the things that you did, to not get distracted, not let them pull you off topic, and reassert yourself. I'm not going to be talked to this way. And then take some sort of action. Hang up the phone, leave the room, get in your car, pack a bag, go stay with a friend, you know, leave the marriage, break up with them, kind of whatever you feel is right, or the right consequence for that action. Also, I like this. They said, do not accept derogatory statements or actions. If they call you a name, and they use the example in the book, if he says, you know, you're a fat cow, tell him you don't believe that. And if he tells you, well, you should believe it because it's true, to say, you know, I don't believe it because I might be overweight, but I'm not a cow. And then resume what you're doing. So I think so many of us, and I've talked about this before, it's so important that we put our hurt feelings and our self-worth in two different buckets and don't let these things spill over. So if a person's calling you names and they're trying to put you down, this is not a reflection of you, even if there might be some kernels of truth to it. You might be overweight, right? You might, whatever they're saying, but that aggressive kind of behavior, that's on them. So self-worth, hurt feelings, two different buckets. Don't let them define you. You define you. Don't own the garbage that they're throwing at you. Let's see. Another thing that I really liked about the book too is they talked about the cycle of abuse. And they brought up a really fantastic point that I had never thought about before. And that is, the cycle of abuse describes the abuser's behavior. It doesn't describe anything from our end. Yeah, that makes total sense. So the more traditional cycle of abuse is the tension building, the explosion, and then the honeymoon phase. So that tension building is, you know, maybe silent treatment, kind of subtle put downs. Like you were saying, Z, the energy starts changing and you can just start sensing that something's off. And then it's followed by some sort of silent treatment could be part of that. Some sort of explosion, name calling, put downs, rage attacks, these kinds of things. And then they start making up for it. The honeymoon phase, I'm sorry, it won't happen. We'll go get couples counseling. You know, it's not all my fault. Look at what you did. You made me do this. You need to own a part in it too. Our relationships takes two people. We need help, right? Like our relationship needs help. So there's this kind of honeymoon phase that leads back to tension building, abusive outburst, honeymoon, tension building, abusive outburst, honeymoon stage. But she said, from our end, from the target's end, it tends to be denial, isolation, self-blame, followed by anger, followed by blaming them for everything that they're doing, followed by depression, followed by us caving in and developing this feeling of hopelessness. Or the way that we can exit that cycle, if we get to that place of either hopelessness, or that's the place where we experience enough pain that we're now motivated to take a different type of action. And that can be our exit out of that cycle. But yeah, it takes a while for a person to realize what it is that they're going through. So Lucy had some really great questions that she added onto her notes, as always. So let me go through some of these, and we'll you guys feel free to jump in here and let me know. Let me know. Let me know your thoughts about these.
I think we've covered an awful lot of them already, Dana.
We might have.
You've already talked about thinking of yourself as a target and a victim and how that feels. And does it feel differently? We've sure talked about that, and we've talked about the steps and the words to say. And I think we've pretty much covered, if it's not effective, will you stay? I think everybody's universally no. So
I think you bring up a good point with question number 9. You said, do you see the importance of the consequence piece of boundary setting? That boundaries without teeth are not worth the effort they took to say them.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you guys feel about the consequence piece, and what might be, some things that you could do different, or that you have done different in the past to change things?
Be upfront right away with what my boundary is, and knowing what the consequence is going to be. So start with the consequence in mind. So I'm clear, because you have so many gray areas. Or with me, my issue is I'm always, I think someone on the live feed yesterday was talking about analysis paralysis, and I want to be a good person, and I want to give the other person the benefit of the doubt, and okay, I said this is what I want, but am I being too hard? And so it's just knowing what my line is and what the consequence is and what I feel more comfortable with.
Yes, I agree. I had a coworker, this is right before I quit my job, and I knew I was going to quit anyhow. And like you'd said, I love the way you said that, the energy changed.
Mm-hmm.
We had a conversation, and I was talking to her about with my website, and I was going to start doing this. And it was just that moment. We were out at lunch, and she gave me this look of total contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And it was I had never seen, nobody's ever looked at me like that before. I've had disdain, I've had like anger, I've had different emotions, but never just that sneer of absolute contempt. And it caught me so off guard that I got in the car and I texted another friend about it. And I said, I just can't believe what I experienced. And sure enough, that was we went out to lunch. I think it was over the weekend. And that Monday, everything changed. And she became a awful witch, made my life a living hell for 3 weeks. And I had promised, because there was a lot of that kind of stuff, abuse really is what it was, when I was in nursing school. And I had promised myself at that time that I would never ever allow myself to be in a situation where I was treated like that again. And I knew I was going to quit. I was gearing up to quit my job, and that just really cemented it. And um, I worked with pretty much either nurses, psychiatrists, or therapists, and our boss was a therapist, and I was talking to her about it, and she was making excuses for this behavior and making it seem like, you know, she was justifying it. And I was so proud of myself for standing up for myself and saying, you know what, there's no excuse for this. I know what I experienced. I know I'm being gaslighted. Like, this is extreme stuff. I don't feel this way around anybody else. I didn't feel this way about her Friday. I know what I'm experiencing. I'm not going to tolerate it. And there's nothing to talk about. And so I just completely cut her out of my life. And I struggled with a lot of kind of guilt. Well, maybe I misread that. Maybe because there was always these kernels of truth to some of the things that she was saying. But
Dana, do you think when that happens,
mhm.
they act like that, it's covert, and is it that we have the blinders up? Because I had a friend for years that she did a couple of things that made me question, is she really my friend? But she was always so supportive, and I would pour my heart out to her. But then when I started learning about narcissism and all of the toxic people that were around me, that energy changed. And after that, she was a totally different person. That look I saw, and then how she communicated with me was so like devilish. And I'm like, who is this person? So I'm like, is it us, or is that they're really good at showing us what they want, the side they want us to see?
Yeah. No, it's them,
Mhm.
and when that narcissistic injury is triggered, because that was the dynamic with my coworker too. But I will say, hindsight being what it is, one of the first things that she told me when I began working there, because the first month or so, she made my life a living hell as well. And it didn't register as that because I think because I was new and I was making a lot of mistakes. And so I just thought, well, maybe I'm feeling attacked because she's correcting me every step of the way. But in one of the early things she said, I just want you to know that you really can't trust people around here. And I remember thinking, that's a weird thing to say. And then, of course, fast forward to the very end, it was her that I couldn't trust.
Exactly.
But we had stretches of years in between where we would have coffee in my office every single day at the tail end of the day. We went camping together. We had hung out together. There were times where there were those little kind of like hen pecking, little snide, subtle things where, she would mention about working out because she didn't want to be overweight, kind of things where I'm like, are we talking about me or you? Kind of, these little kind of subtle, snarky digs.
Little slights, yeah.
Yes. And then I saw how she was with men that she dated and with her son, and especially with the men. That was when I really realized she doesn't see it. Like, she really doesn't see how hot and cold she runs, and like how crazy her behavior is. And so at the tail end, and that was what I kept going back to, was friends don't treat other friends with contempt. They don't make their life a living hell. This isn't a communication issue. There's nothing to work on here because she doesn't see it. I've seen her be like this towards other people, and she doesn't see it. So what's there to work on? So I guess the boundary, the boundary for me had to do that whole situation over again. I would have realized she wasn't a safe person from day one, and I would have respected that way that I felt, and I would have kept her at like a professional distance from, polite professional brief kind of a thing from day one, and I would have trusted my judgment. Lucy, you had said that too about in your notes about your, let me find it. I underlined it because I thought that was so profound. You'd said, all my life, I thought that because I had this reaction, this kind of CPTSD reaction, that I was the problem.
Yeah.
And it's true. It's not an overreaction. And it is an overreaction.
Yes.
It leaves me incapable of doing anything for a time. But my reaction is not wrong. It's very accurate at identifying abusive behavior. It's uncanny how accurate it is. So once I befriended my CPTSD and accepted it and started treating it like it was simply an enormously loud alarm system, things got much better for me.
Exactly.
I get goosebumps reading that, because you're so spot on with that. And to pay attention to how we feel, and we don't feel this way around people that are safe. It's abusive people that make us feel like we're being abused.
Right.
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 Yeah.
And that's true. That's exactly all my life. I thought I was crazy.
Yep.
But I was surrounded by narcissists. My entire family, with the exception of my mother, are all severely narcissistic. Not a little.
And it took me I'm over 40. And I told Dana, welcome to the 40s club.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to really figure out how I had so much anxiety, social anxiety. And I'm such, in my heart, I love being around people. I'm just the life of the party. But when I get around people, even in work situations, I get nervous, I start shaking, and I get triggered. But now I know that it's me reacting to the people that are around me who I didn't feel safe. So my body is telling me I have to honor it.
Right.
But you just over, she's just sensitive, oversensitive. She's scary. And then I started thinking that about myself, but that's pretty powerful to be able to read a room, and I started learning about being an empath and all those. There's really are strengths, but you don't know because of the abuse, and you've been devalued and not taken for granted. So you don't, value yourself and know what your talents are, because these people walking around who's doing this, they don't have any feelings. They can't read anything. They're just reacting, and then we're reacting to them. So it's just, about understanding, like Lucy said, is what's really going on in your body, and know that. And that's powerful. I have to remind myself of that.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, it's this internal alarm system that we all have, and it can feel like it's working against us at times, but it's really not. It's designed to keep us safe. And it's trying to bring so much of this to our awareness, but it can make us feel like we are the crazy one, especially like Lucy, if you're kind of raised in this kind of den of dysfunction where problematic or abusive behavior is the normal. It's sort of like if everybody around you is a snake and you're a bunny rabbit.
Right. That's how I feel.
Like, or actually a better saying, have you heard the saying, you can't soar with eagles if you're scratching with chickens?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. It's like you're kind of this eagle and this whole family of chickens, and they're like, oh, you're the one that's look at your bald, look how big you are, look how big your wings are, you're ugly, you're horrible. And then you grow up thinking, oh my gosh, it's all me. Why don't I fit in? And then you kind of realize, you know what? They're just chickens. Like that's
because in my family, I'm the compassionate, I'm the nice one. All my other siblings, my mom, they will get you. They have reputations. They narcissists. They're mean. And, I'm not saying that to be mean. It's just over the years of what I've seen. I'm just like, why am I so different than them? Like, they find me in the trash can, like, what happened? And then that's when, I started doubting myself and who am I and why am I in this world? And in my family, they were the origin who abused me and took advantage of my niceness and kindness. And then when they were involved in these inappropriate things and setting up to get people, they would only tell me certain information because they know that, you know, I'm by the book. So I got named Miss Goody Two Shoes, you know, oh, don't tell her because, and so then I'm like, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want them to think that, you know, I'm trying to rat anybody out, you know, and it's but come to find out they're the outliers. It's not me. That's it. They're the inappropriate ones, not me.
I think these relationships really help us to examine whatever issues we might have that need to be resolved. Like me, I realize I have some pretty big abandonment issues that I've needed to work on. So as painful as the relationship was, it forced me to look at the past, to look at why did I choose this person? Why did I tolerate this? What issues do I need to work on personally? And I really, it was like a mirror. I had to really look at me and say, okay, what happened here? And what is it that from my past that maybe allowed this person to come in? What's the lesson here? So that's, if there's a good thing about relationships like these, is you really do introspection, like we're talking about, and going, oh, wait a second, my mother did this or my dad did this. So it can really help you to heal before you start another relationship, hopefully.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, because another thing that I see often is people that are like, okay, it's just this abusive partner. That's the problem. And if I get rid of them, then, and that this was my thinking too. Like, statistically speaking, what are the odds that I'm going to crash into another sociopath? So I was targeted. It felt like a hit and run accident. I wasn't concerned about it happening again. And you know, I had dated this awful guy when I was in high school, and really for many, many years, I never dated anybody even close to that. But then I crashed into two in like a fairly short amount of time. And although I will say, you know, hindsight being what it is, a lot of those relationships I stayed in like way too long, that were problematic in their own right, but never to that extreme. But what I see a lot of people doing is like thinking that the other partner is the problem. And our part in this is to really examine boundaries. And this isn't to blame the victim or saying that we somehow deserved it or, you know, asked for it or, you know, what have you. But at a minimum, being in a relationship with a narcissist, either it's a parent or it's later down the road, you're going to have boundary issues because they've eroded them. So you might not be aware that you have boundary issues, but odds are you do. And so it's really important to take a step back and realize there's some work within you that you need to do in order for to get back out and get yourself to a healthy place before you start dating. Because the odds of us having those boundaries eroded, struggling with, you know, the PTSD and everything else, it can really cause a lot of confusion in a person, and they're incredibly vulnerable and don't even realize it. So it's a good idea to take some time and to focus on, you know, building friends, building hobbies, these kinds of things, kind of shoring up your support system and building your own life instead of jumping into another relationship. Because I think so many people they're trying to fill that need of those abandonment issues, of feeling unloved and unimportant. And they're trying to fill this with a romantic partner. And that's oftentimes like the worst way to go about it. And even if it does work, it's still not a healthy way, because if they leave or if they get hit by a bus, then those issues are still not resolved and that person's back to square one. So yeah. So you guys, I think we're good. We thank you so much for your time for book club. And is there any final words you want to add before we wrap it up? Somebody's dog wants to say something.
That's Joy. She's like,
My
it's over.
Yeah.
my cat's ready for a treat, so she's
Oh,
telling me it's time.
gotcha.
Say hi to everybody.
Oh, what a little fluffalump.
Cute.
Good deal. Well, thank you so much for your time. You guys hang tight, and I will see if I can end the Zoom thing without losing you. So hang on a second. Okay, for everybody else, thank you so much for your time. If you're interested in being a part of the book club, you can email me at deardana@thriveafterabuse.com. We're going to be doing these book club live streams every month. Every month we have a different book. You can find out more about that on my website, thriveafterabuse.com. Under the tab for book club, we've got a list of all the books that we're reading through 2017. So with that said, I'll see you next week for the Wednesday live stream. So lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and I will talk to you soon. Okay. Good night. And let's see. Stop the live stream, and I'll be on in a second here.